Wow. I I actually don't know how to do this. Like, it's been what, close to 4.5 years since I did this? Like, well, granted, the whole turning on the mic, hitting record, and everything is something that I've been doing since then, but still, like, doing this sort of episode, I don't know. I haven't done it since episode 0 itself. But anyways, as usual, do the intro. So welcome to Break Time on My Side, your number one break time podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. Now, I kind of wanted to do this episode because, just like the title says, I think it's time for a change. So I've been thinking about making these changes over, I guess, the past year, if not even more than that. I've been more serious about the whole thought of it this year. And I guess now's as good a time as any to make that change because, I can't wait forever, right? So the first time I did an episode 0, I was telling you what the podcast is about, what it's going to be called, that I'm going to be hosting it, and what I intended on talking about, what the shows are going to be like. And, that was right at the beginning before episode 1 of everything. And ever since then, it's been an interesting ride. I've made a couple of changes, I've made a couple of adjustments, but it's all been small additions here and there and small changes here and there to make the existing podcast better. But at this point, I want to make possibly my most major change ever, and it might look small, but it's not. And it's changing the name of the podcast as well as a couple of other things. So changing the name of the podcast is probably the most major change I've made on this podcast ever since I changed the instrumentals and, I sort of standardize how I'm going to be doing the intros. And it's something that I've thought about for, like I said earlier on, a little over a year, because I've been thinking about changing the name for such a long time. And it's sort of been there for a couple of different reasons. One is because I honestly felt like it was a little bit long. Like, don't get me wrong, there's long things that have been particularly successful, but, when I think about Break Time on West Side, it's not that easy to remember, partially because of its length. And the two, which I guess is probably the main reason, or at least the one that I give the most priority, is because people don't remember the name as well because of its length and because of the intricacies. Because when people are typing break time, they'll type it as one word or as two words, and West Side will be typed as one word or two words. And getting someone to remember the name Break Time on West Side just seemed like it was so much work. And to a degree, I feel like that's impacted the amount of reach I've had or the amount of reach I could have. So I feel like making a change to something shorter, something simpler, could be a lot better. Now, this obviously will come with certain pros and cons. For everyone who's remembered it as Break Time on West Side and has told people to listen to Break Time on West Side, will probably, if they haven't updated their knowledge or haven't been listening recently, mislead a few people. But at least I'm putting it in the description, so hopefully it should still be easy to find when you search for Break Time on West Side. But all in all, I guess that's probably one of the cons that will come from it. Some people might not recognize the podcast. Some people might think that I've changed everything and I'm no longer doing stuff the same old way, which isn't really the case. This isn't like one of those, you went through like baptism and now you're suddenly more religious. Nah, this is like turning 18, if you kind of think about it. It's not like you were any less mature when you are 17 and 364 days, and it's not like you'll be more mature when you're 18 years and 1 day. Like, the difference, not really there, at least in terms of content or how I'll be trying to approach things. It's pretty much just going to be me doing the whole thing, more or less the same way that I've been doing it, since earlier on. Now, I do intend on broadening and diversifying a couple of things, so I may not just stick to love, sex, and relationships. I might include one or two other topics. It's not like I'll be going as far as discussing sports or anything, but I will sort of, broaden the subject base and the topic base of what I talk about. And well, considering that I had already sort of gotten rid of like the show numbers and the show topics and the splitting of them initially, in I guess it was 1-2 seasons ago, that kind of continues. I'm not trying to set up any different shows, but I will sort of keep the differences different, at least for now. I also do want to start including more interviews with different people. That's not a guarantee on when they'll start or who will be brought on, but I will start to experiment with that a little bit more. I'll try and see if I can be a little bit more active on social media just so that I can help the podcast grow. Because I feel like I had gotten to a point where the podcast had sort of stagnated and it was in need of growth. And things like the name were holding me back from getting more reach. Because if you tell someone, go and search for Breaktime on Westside and listen to it, by the time they get home, remembering that name in and of itself might be, almost impossible for some. So shortening the name, that's something that I'm doing. And, this is the last episode where you'll hear me do the intro for Breaktime on Westside, because now when I change the name, of course, I will be giving it a different name. Now, I thought about different names and I really, really thought of changing to something that sounded completely new, but I sort of thought against it. But as I was busy thinking, one of the things that I told myself I'd have to do was make sure I remove the Westside name. Mostly because for a lot of people, it seemed a bit misleading because it makes it sound like I'm talking about the States, and yet that's not entirely what I talk about. Like, I'm a guy in Westlands. I'd have said Westlands, but Westside just sounded better, so I went with it. And it's misled some people to think that I only talk about stuff that happens in the States, or I don't, try and deal with like local stories and everything, which I've really tried to change. And, changing the name is something that should kind of help with that. And plus also, there's definitely stories from the east side and the north side and the south side, of course. And, they're probably interesting stories as well. So I can't entirely ignore them. Plus, it's not like I'll always be in the exact location I'm in. It's not like I'll always be in Nairobi. And I need to sort of give an opening to allow myself to do that and not be like, welcome to Breaktime on Westside, blah, blah. And then I finish with coming to you from, I don't know, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, or Kampala, Uganda, or someplace in Congo. Because now that almost seems a little bit misleading. Like, what's the West Side then? So that was one thing that I made sure I'd get rid of. The other bits of the original name, I sort of thought of getting out of them and, leaving them. But I figured I still need to be remembered. And the one thing that everyone remembers whenever I tell them the name and they forget it is break time. So after thinking about it for a little bit, I figured, what? Instead of changing the name completely, I decided to sort of rebrand by a bit and change the name to the Breaktime Podcast. It's a name that's been used interchangeably by multiple other podcasts before, and mine definitely isn't new, but at least it's very reminiscent of what my podcast used to be called, and it's something that sounds good enough that you can actually hold on to and go back and check for it. But all in all, that's probably the most major change that I've got. And just like in episode 0, I gave a breakdown of like the intros, what they're supposed to sound like, the outros, and if there's going to be instrumentals. Back then there was 0 instrumentals, it was just the intro and the outro. But this time I can tell you that the intro and the outro have changed, yes, but it's one intro and one outro. It's not show specific because I've practically abolished the shows. It's mostly just, how I'll be handling each episode, the Tuesday and the Friday. And for the sake of uniformity, I might as well just keep it, the same intro, the same outro. Now, instrumentals, I haven't changed them yet. I'm still thinking about it. I'm still going to be experimenting because I don't know if I should keep the instrumentals running for the entire time that I'm discussing most things, or if I should just have them for certain bits. Either way, I will be sort of doing the changes to that if there are going to be any changes, at least probably over the course of December. And maybe if there are going to be any major changes to the instrumentals, you'll probably be hearing them in January. But all in all, For those of y'all that have listened to this podcast from when it was break time on Westside, whether it was from the first episode, whether it was from somewhere in the middle, whether it's when I started getting to the 3-digit mark, whether it's just recently, I do not take any of your time listen to me saying a bunch of shit about shit for granted. And I'm hoping that the change of name and a couple of the changes that I'll be making very soon will at least try and increase the family, the fan base, the crowd of people that get to listen to this podcast. Because, that's kind of the goal that was there at the beginning. The hope was to reach more people. And if these changes do it, then all the better. At the end of the day, I will still rely on your feedback. If you guys like the change of name, if you guys like the instrumentals, if you guys like the way I'm doing each and every show, then I'll always appreciate your feedback. Because at the end of the day, I make this show so that you guys can consume and enjoy what it is that you're consuming. If you're not enjoying it, then I'm probably not doing a good job. So I usually rely on your feedback on the topics, on the format and everything. So if you ever feel like I did something that you didn't like, then feel free to hit me up. And if it's something that I can change and it's possible to do it, I'll most probably see how I can make that happen. But all in all, thank you so much for listening all the way till the end of this. If you have managed to, thank you so much for listening to Break Time on Westside. The Break Time podcast resumes from episode 450. And for old time's sake, since this is going to be the last episode where I get to do it, I can do the intro again, then the outro. So, welcome to Break Time on Westside, your number one Break Time podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. The man on the mic is Sir Denver B. This has been Break Time on Westside. On to new changes. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end. This is probably going to be the one episode where I actually don't edit shit at all and I just put it out as is. But all in all, thank you so much for listening. The IG and the Facebook will change, but the Twitter probably won't. But either way, you will hear about that in episode 450. So thank you so much for listening again, and I will catch you guys on the next break.